boy had no name anyone remembered. On the streets of Nairobi, people called him Small Boy, Hey You, or sometimes nothing at all. He slept behind closed shops, wrapped himself in old sacks when the nights turned cold, and survived by collecting plastic bottles near the bus station. Every morning, he woke before sunrise because the city became crueler after dark. Hunger was easier to fight in daylight, but on one rainy evening, something happened that would change everything. It began with a sound, a weak scratching noise. At first, he ignored it. The alley beside the bakery was full of rats, cats, and broken things nobody wanted. But the sound came again, soft, desperate, trembling. The boy stopped walking. Rainwater dripped from his hair into his eyes as he looked toward a pile of garbage near the drain. For a moment, he almost walked away. He had learned not to care too much. Caring hurt when you had nothing. But something about that sound pulled him closer. Then he saw it. A small bird. Its feathers were soaked with rain and dirt. One wing bent in a terrible direction. The tiny creature shivered beside a crushed plastic bottle, barely alive. The boy stared at it silently, and for the first time in many months, he saw himself. Broken, forgotten, thrown away. Slowly, he knelt beside it. Hey, he whispered softly. You still alive? The bird blinked weakly. That night, instead of searching for food, the boy carried the bird inside his torn jacket and walked toward the abandoned construction site where he slept. Rain soaked both of them, but he held the tiny creature carefully against his chest like something precious. He didn't know this would be the last normal night of his life. Inside the unfinished building, the wind howled through empty windows. The boy found an old cardboard box, lined it with dry paper, and placed the bird inside. He searched everywhere for water, finally collecting some rainwater in a rusty tin can. You can't die, he whispered. Okay. The bird barely moved. The boy sat beside it all night, hungry, cold, watching. By morning, the bird was still alive, and strangely, that gave the boy hope. The next few days became different. For the first time in years, he stopped thinking only about survival. Every morning, he searched for crumbs, rice, or tiny worms for the bird before feeding himself. Sometimes, he gave the bird the better portion. People laughed when they saw him talking to it. Crazy street kid, one man muttered. But the boy didn't care. The bird became his friend, his family, his reason to wake up. Days passed, then weeks. Slowly, the bird grew stronger. It began hopping around the cardboard box, chirping softly whenever the boy returned. The broken wing still hung awkwardly, but the bird looked alive again. And so did the boy. For the first time in years, he smiled. One afternoon, while sitting near a traffic light with the bird perched beside him, a woman noticed them. She wore a dark blue coat and carried grocery bags in both hands. At first, she simply watched from across the road. boy noticed her staring and quickly tried to hide the bird inside his jacket. "Wait," the woman called gently. He froze. Street children learned early not to trust adults. Some shouted at them. Some beat them. Others promised help and disappeared forever. The woman walked closer slowly. "Did you save that bird?" The boy shrugged. "It was dying." The woman knelt slightly, surprised at how carefully the boy held the tiny creature. "What's its name?" she asked. The boy looked embarrassed. "Sky." The woman smiled softly. But what happened next changed everything. As she reached into her bag, the boy immediately stepped back, thinking she might chase him away. Instead, she handed him a warm loaf of bread. "I'm Miriam," she said quietly. The smell nearly drove him crazy. Fresh bread, still warm. His stomach twisted painfully. But before taking a bite, the boy tore off a small piece and fed the bird first. Miriam noticed, and suddenly her eyes filled with tears, because 20 years earlier, she had seen that same kindness in someone else. Her son, a boy who had died at the age of 11. Since losing him, Miriam had stopped noticing people. She moved through life like a shadow, working, sleeping, surviving. Nothing touched her heart anymore. Until now, until this hungry street boy fed a broken bird before feeding himself. Miriam returned the next day, and the next. At first, the boy didn't trust her. He expected her to disappear like everyone else. But she kept coming back with food, blankets, and medicine for the bird's wing. One evening, she finally asked, "Where are your parents?" The boy looked away. "My mother died. And your father?" "I don't know." The silence that followed felt heavy. Miriam sat beside him on the cold pavement. "How long have you been alone?" The boy pretended not to hear, but his eyes answered for him. "Too long." Over the next month, something impossible began happening. The boy started changing. He bathed regularly at a public restroom Miriam paid for. She brought him clean clothes, then books, then notebooks. At first, he only looked at the pictures. "You should be in school," she told him. He laughed bitterly. "School is for real children." The words broke her heart, because somewhere along the way, the world had convinced him he wasn't one anymore. One rainy afternoon, Miriam took him to a small clinic because his cough had become worse. The nurse looked shocked when she learned the boy slept outside. "How old are you?" the nurse asked. The boy shrugged. "Maybe 12. Maybe." He didn't even know for sure. That night, Miriam cried alone in her apartment. She couldn't stop thinking about him sleeping in abandoned buildings, while thousands of people passed him every day without seeing him. But the biggest surprise came 2 weeks later. Miriam arrived at the construction site carrying a small cage. "I talked to a wildlife rescue center," she said carefully. "They can help Sky heal properly." The boy's face fell instantly. "No, they'll take care of him." "No." The bird fluttered nervously as his voice echoed through the empty building. Miriam paused. Then she understood. The bird wasn't just a bird. It was the only thing that had stayed with him, the only thing that needed him. Without Sky, he would feel alone again. So Miriam sat beside him quietly. "What if," she whispered gently, "what if both of you came with me instead?" The boy stared at her. He thought he heard wrong. "You mean sleep in your house?" "For tonight," she said softly. But deep inside, both of them knew this was much bigger than one night. The apartment was tiny but warm. The boy stood near the doorway for several minutes, afraid to touch anything. He had forgotten what safety felt like. That first night, he slept on the floor beside the bird's cage, not because he had to, because he didn't believe the bed was really his. Around midnight, Miriam walked quietly into the room and found him awake. "You okay?" she whispered. The boy nodded slowly. Then, after a long silence, he asked the question that shattered her heart completely. "Why are you helping me?" Miriam looked at him carefully, because she had asked herself the same thing every night. Finally, she answered honestly, "Because someone should have done it sooner." The boy turned away quickly, pretending to sleep, but Miriam saw the tears sliding silently down his face. Months passed. Sky's wing healed enough for short flights around the apartment. The boy started attending a nearby school. At first, the other children mocked him for his old scars, his nervousness, and the way he hid food inside his pockets after lunch. Old habits from hunger. But slowly he adjusted. Slowly he began laughing again. And every evening after school, he rushed home to tell Miriam everything he learned. One afternoon, while cleaning the apartment, Miriam found something hidden under the boy's mattress. Pieces of old bread, carefully wrapped in paper. Her chest tightened painfully. Even now, after months of safety, part of him still believed food could disappear tomorrow. That night, she cooked his favorite meal and quietly placed extra bread beside him. "You never have to hide food again," she whispered. The boy looked down silently. Then something unexpected happened. He started crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears falling into his plate because deep down, he was finally beginning to believe her. Years later, people would talk about the famous veterinarian who rescued injured birds across the country. They would admire his kindness, his patience, and the strange calmness animals felt around him. Many knew his story, but very few knew where it truly began. Not in a school, not in a clinic, not in a rescue center. It began in a rainy alley with a broken bird nobody wanted, and a broken boy the world had forgotten. Because sometimes saving something small ends up saving you too. And sometimes the people who seem weakest are carrying the strongest hearts. As for Sky, the bird eventually healed enough to fly freely. One morning, the boy carried him to a park and opened his hands slowly. For a moment, the bird stayed there, Then it flew into the bright morning sky. The boy watched silently as tears filled his eyes. But this time, they were not tears of loss. They were tears of becoming. Because the street boy, who once believed he was invisible, finally understood something important. He mattered, and far above him, the bird circled once, almost like goodbye, or maybe thank you. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more stories that feel real.